Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. Yes, it's finally here. We are talking Ty West's MaXXXine trailer. Finally dropped to say this is one of the most anticipated films for the channel as well as the horror community in general. I would say is an understatement. Ever since Pearl, we've all been looking forward to this with that little teaser at the very end. We've been hearing news, we've been seeing photos, but finally, yes, we actually have a visual trailer, a little over 2 minutes. And I gotta say, with how epic Pearl as well as X were, and just how dynamic the storytelling was in both those installments, where does this leave Maxine? Let's find out. In 1980s Hollywood, adult film star and aspiring actress Maxine Minx finally gets her big break. However, as a mysterious killer stalks the starlets of Los Angeles, a trail of blood threatens to reveal her sinister past. We knew this thing was taking place in Hollywood after we got that little teaser at the end of Pearl, and that automatically had my curiosity with how well Ty West composed those shots with X and Pearl in those settings. It left a lot of room for creativity for the Hollywood setting. And I got to say, just from this trailer alone, you can really see that he's leaning into that giallo element that we heard West talk about prior to getting really any footage to this. We see those vibrant reds and blues, especially in those nighttime shots there. We have that one particular shot of Mia Goth walking down the alley. It's just very brief, but you kind of get the fog and the dark elements there. You can easily see that influence from Dario Argento and a lot of the giallo films that we have seen in the past. I'm also excited about this narrative standpoint here with the Hollywood aspect. We have seen this kind of setting in previous horror films. I mean, Scream 3 uses it, You Season 2. I always like this kind of incorporation of the Hollywood setting because you get this melding, which we do see here as well, with kind of set pieces and this kind of meta awareness a little bit that we are seeing, which we'll get into here in a second. And I absolutely love it. I think it's going to be a great storytelling aspect, and I think it really does leave the door open for a lot of creativity. You can really see that they're leaning into it, as we do see that they are on some sets as well, and it just looks downright interesting, as we do see Mia Goth on set several times. The opening is fantastic with her kind of doing those line readings and going on auditions. I love when stories lean into this element because it kind of leaves a lot of room for fact and fiction, what's real and what's not. And kind of getting into that fact and fiction element, one of the storytelling devices that I was really surprised to see here was the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, and this kind of idea. It's 1985, and the story that's unfolding of the Night Stalker being out there while these killings are happening, and Maxine being in Hollywood. I think that's a rather intriguing element in terms of being able to break up that narrative between the Maxine story as well as potentially going into other just random killings that are going on, and if these stories actually intertwine or it is just a tease. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood had used this element in between their fictional characters as well as the actual Manson family murders, and I thought it was really well done. So I'm curious to see how Ty West is going to meld that element together, or if they ever actually intertwine at all. And then the cast here, I mean, there's not much to be said. It is an all-star cast. We've seen Mia Goth playing Maxine. We've seen her play Pearl, so we know she's not going to disappoint. She has amazing range. In just the few things we've seen her in here, this trailer, she absolutely sells it. I go back to the very beginning of her doing the little read, the auditions, I think was so well done. And then her talking Maxine Minx, injecting her name into great actors that had started in horror. I think that was such a great element as well. Kevin Bacon, I mean, we talk about him on the channel all the time. Him returning to horror, it is that man's bread and butter. To see him play this detective of sorts, I think that's going to be rather interesting. I noticed he had that southern accent. I'm curious to see if there's going to be any ties to Maxine's roots. That was alluded that her father was a televised preacher. I'm curious to see if maybe he's behind the one that is tracking down Maxine. I think that could be a rather interesting element. And then going into probably what everyone's really talking about was the Bates Motel showing up, which I'm curious to see how they're going to use it. I know that they're in Hollywood, they could be using it as a set piece, which I think they certainly will. But I think maybe there's more to it than that. As I mentioned, Kevin Bacon playing this private investigator of sorts. I think it's a little reminiscent of the original Psycho, Milton Arbogast playing being that private investigator as well. And I think maybe there is more of a reflection than we think with the Bates Motel and Psycho in general. I mentioned those horror roots into Hollywood where they use that as a setting. Now, in the novelization of Psycho 2, that is primarily the setting, actually, for that story. It's way different than what we do see in terms of what we got with the actual feature film. Where this one is, they're making a movie about Norman Bates and him going to Hollywood to stop it. And they really do lean into those giallo elements as well. So I'm curious if there's a deeper meaning here in seeing as we get into these killings that are not necessarily the Night Stalker, but maybe someone else. I'm possibly thinking, this is just my little theory here, that it could be MaXXXine herself, maybe not even aware that she's doing the killings, in sort of a Norman Bates-esque kind of style there. I think that could be rather interesting if they throw that element in there. We've seen, Pearl do those types of killings, and then we've seen it in X as well. So I'm curious to see if that's going to carry over. Maybe the events of X have left lasting impression on MaXXXine. But, time will tell. I think we opened up a lot of interesting avenues with this trailer. It looks very cinematic. I think, looking at A24 as a studio and always that kind of narrative that it's elevated horror and not for everybody, I think the X franchise and Ty West have really taken this idea and given it to those elevated horror fans as well as general audience, and they have found a liking to it. So I think this one is going to be another knockout of the park. I cannot wait till July 5th. I will be there front and center with Dylan. We are so excited for this one. Let us know what you think about that MaXXXine trailer. And, my little theory there, is this going to be MaXXXine herself doing the killings, or is it going to be someone entirely different? Are we going to actually see the Night Stalker in this as well? A lot of interesting questions posed just after this little trailer. But if you haven't checked out the rest of our channel and just stumbled upon us through this trailer reaction, definitely take a look. We have our first Omen spoiler and spoiler-free discussions up, as well as a lot of good and great content coming this week. Some new releases coming your way, so stay tuned for that. But until next time, I'm Luke Janesco, and stay scared.
Do the hard shit, gonna do it live. Put Splattercast, kick it every day they live. Splattercast, gonna slash your ass. 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 Splattercast, gonna slash your ass.